Welcome to Politely Pushy. I'm your host, Eric Chummy, and I am so excited today. Today, we've got Michael Oldenburg. He's the head of communications at Aeva. They're a publicly traded firm in the Lidar space, but his background is super fascinating because he's worked at many big brands like DJI, PayPal, and others. So, Michael, welcome to the show. I can't wait to pick your brain about everything to do with Lidar and self-driving cars and automation and what it's like to do comms at a publicly traded company.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. I'm really happy to be here and spend some time with you this afternoon.
So obviously you haven't been at Aeva for that long. So my guess is the learning curve for you has been immense. You've only been there just this calendar year. What has it been like for someone who is a communications executive, but you've never done LiDAR before? You've done other tech, but you haven't done this.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, this company is a pure play perception and sensing technology company. We make LiDAR, which new to me-ish when I started, but actually, going back to almost a decade ago when I was at Autodesk, which is a 3D design company. We were using LiDAR back then for digitally processing as built or fully constructed buildings. So we could get a 3D model out of a fully constructed building. So it's been something that's been in my background actually for almost a decade. But it's now the full-time, full-time scope of what we're looking after
Is
here at
that
Aeva.
part of the reason why you got the job actually is because you had some experience with LiDAR and it wasn't totally brand new for you?
Yeah, I think that had a lot to do with it. And, even most recently where I was before this at DJI, the drone company, LiDAR was starting to be one of the new sensor sets on our commercial industrial drones. So you could see the application for LiDAR on a drone as the surveying and mapping function, right? So a drone with a LiDAR on it could be flying over a field or a plot of land and getting a really detailed 3D scan of that environment.
There's so much about the future and what you guys are doing. It's so exciting, right? Because you got self-driving cars, whether it's going to be the camera approach or the LiDAR approach, you've got whatever Tesla's doing, and all electric vehicles will become autonomous vehicles. So this is just so important about the way the world's going to work, what it means for the usage of energy, right? Climate change is all related to what you guys are doing. So what is your biggest challenge in terms of communicating to a bonehead mass audience, someone like myself who doesn't get all the technology that's going in? They only see the results, right? They see the pretty pictures, they see cool diagrams, but they don't see the tech involved. What is your biggest challenge right now?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, LiDAR is going to be used in just about everything that needs to sense or perceive the world around it, right? In better resolution than what a standard camera can offer. And I think one of the challenges for our tech, while it is cool, it's invisible, right? And that's by design, right? You can't see the laser beams that are coming out of the piece of hardware, right? Bouncing light off of the objects around it and then reabsorbing that light and producing that into what a computer sees as a 3D model of the world around it. And so that's definitely one of the challenges. Having been on the consumer tech side as well, like it's definitely not a technology that you can see and hold readily, but it is powering a lot of things around us. And I think in the next 5 to 10 years, LiDAR is going to be an extremely common technology that really powers like this internet of connected devices, whether that's self-driving cars or self-driving trucks, automated warehouses where you've got self-driving forklifts, or
Self-driving
even
forklifts. Wait a minute. I haven't
yeah.
heard about self-driving forklifts. That's a little
that
too scary
yeah,
now.
warehouse automation, right? I mean, there's a lot of room and opportunity to automate these types of tasks so that we've got a more optimized supply chain end to end.
I've never heard the phrase warehouse automation, but now that you mention it, okay, if we can get cars to drive on their own, we should be able to get forklifts to pick things up and put things down. And in a way,
Yeah.
maybe that's simpler actually.
Exactly. That you hit the nail on the head right there. It is an easier thing because what we call the operational design domain in automotive speak, it's where is this car operating? The ODD inside a warehouse is a very well-known environment, right? With very precise maps of where things are, where obstacles are, where the clear path for the robot to
Right, it's
operate
more fixed. There's
is.
actually less
Exactly.
randomness than a road would have.
Exactly. You don't have to anticipate the cat or the child coming into the street and things like that. Obviously there are humans in a warehouse as well, but
But there's no
the
kids and
warehouse,
pets. They're all adults who are
right,
getting paid to
right.
follow the directions and rules, right?
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of use cases from that to, even thinking through like a security application, right? I mean, one of the great things about Lidar is it doesn't need light to work. We don't need sunlight to be able to see. So when
Is
you
that
think
your is
about
that your push against cameras basically? Because there's this sort of camera versus lidar, rivalry going on right now.
Correct. I think at the end of the day, right, it's not which one will win, one versus the other. I think it's really about this notion of having a sensor suite, right, that will have high definition cameras, that will have ultrasonic sensors, that will have radar sensors and LiDAR as well. What we're
On
seeing
one
here,
car, like we'll have all of that on one
yeah,
car.
yeah, absolutely. And here in San Francisco or in the Bay Area where we are, I see these things multiple times a day. Whether you've got the test vehicles from Cruise or Zoox or Waymo cruising around the city, it's not just one sensor to win them all, right? It's a suite of sensors that all have strengths and weaknesses. And the biggest strength right now for Aeva is our ability to do long distance perception, right? So our newest sensor can see over 500 meters away. And in addition to just
Oh,
seeing an
that's
object, it
long.
also gets,
That's
yeah, and
pretty
it gets
far
that,
away. Yeah.
yeah, and it gets this instant velocity data that no other sensor can provide. No other LiDAR sensor on the market today can get this kind of data that is really proving to be incredibly useful for auto and truck manufacturers.
So I hear this, and the first thing that comes to my mind, which I wasn't preparing to ask, but now I think there must be military applications for this. There must be some secret stuff you guys are doing that I don't know about that you can't talk about.
I'm sure that there probably are. We're squarely focused on the near term kind of multi-billion-dollar opportunity, which is lidar for autonomous vehicles, including cars, trucks, and robo taxis. I think next, the next frontier for us would be along that industrial automation concept. Defense is something that I'm sure lidar is used in that space. It's not a near-term focus for us at the moment.
Who are the customers then from your point of view? Is it basically big auto? I mean, obviously industrial, you could see factories, you could see all the industrial players, and maybe that's bespoke. Maybe it's just some random company that manufactures things and they just want this installed. Or is it, yeah, is it some other equipment manufacturer along the way? Is this some
Yeah.
intermediary that you sell to, or do you sell to the direct, like a big three automaker or somebody that makes a factory? I don't know how this
Yeah.
works, the
I've been
layers along the
learning
way.
this too, Eric. So, the whole world of automotive is definitely new to me, and learning the intricacies about the supply chain, and how, there's definitely your big OEMs like Ford, GM, Volvo, and the whole VW group. But then there's a series of tier one suppliers, right, that they rely on to produce the components that go in their vehicles if they're not making them themselves, right? So we have a really great investment and partnership with Porsche SE, which is the parent company to the Volkswagen Group. So we've got really close tie-ins with Audi, Volkswagen, and others, as well as really great relationships with ZF Group and Denso. So ZF in Europe, Denso in Asia Pacific, and they are the ones that will help us manufacture our final product to meet the size and form and shape specifications of a particular OEM that would want to integrate Aeva's LiDAR solution into their vehicles.
So how much of your communications, because I think of it as like chicken and egg a little bit, right? There's the stock price, and then now because it's public, everyone can track that. How much of it is, okay, the stock price moves, that's the story that we're talking about now, versus, well, here's the thing that we did. We signed up customers X, Y, and Z, like you mentioned, and now the stock price moved. Because in the markets, right, sometimes the stock price just moves and you don't know why, and it creates its own narrative, which is separate from the narrative of the actual company's day-to-day ongoing activities.
Yeah, good point. We obviously keep our finger on the pulse of the stock price day to day, but we don't let it drive our communications. We're really focused on developing our technology and then gaining commercial traction, right? So it's about making sure that folks are aware that we have specific partners. Like last week, we just inked an agreement with Plus, one of the pioneers in autonomous trucking, where Aeva sensor is going to be standard equipment on the over 100,000 trucks they plan to bring to market by 2025. So it's about demonstrating that commercial traction, and then hopefully the stock price goes up based on the traction that is seen by our company compared to our competitors. There's a lot of companies in the LiDAR space right now. A lot of us have gone public over the last probably 6 to 12 months, and so that's definitely one of the challenges, right? Is showing that commercial traction, showing that our technology is different and better. And that customers are seeing that value proposition.
How do you stand out? How do you make yourself seem different from all the other competition?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, I think, part of our DNA. So here at Aeva, we use a completely different LiDAR technology than a lot of the traditional 3D or legacy LiDAR providers. We use something called FMCW, and it's a low,
FMCW?
yeah,
That's a long
frequency
acronym.
modulated, yeah, frequency modulated continuous wave.
Oh, with
And my
radio, like
previous,
FM radio? Is it like that?
exactly, you got it. So our technology uses kind of like a Doppler shift methodology to not only find out where something is in space with an XYZ coordinate, but assign that instantaneous velocity value to it, which is critical, especially if you're going at like highway speeds, right? So you want to know, is there an object? Is it 200 meters out? Is it 500 meters out? Is it going the same direction as you, or is it coming toward you? And it could be something that could cause concern from a safety standpoint. And so our product is one of the few on the market that's using this FMCW technology that gives these autonomy engineers, the ones building these perception stacks using all these other sensors, that instant data that they can readily rely upon to then program their autonomous vehicle to make the appropriate decisions when it comes to safety.
And obviously, you don't have to program the decisions. That's for the manufacturer to do, right? You're just providing the LiDAR, and then someone else is coding that logic. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So there are companies out there, again, just like the Waymos and the Cruises of the world, that are tackling that really challenging AI question, right? Of, now that I see the world as a vehicle, what do I do with this data, and how do I react, and what's safe and what's not?
Right. So at least that's their problem. That's not your problem in terms of your code.
Correct.
Okay. So then you have so many stakeholders. You got customers, you've got end consumers, right? People like me that will never buy your product, but we would be the end users of it. You've got investors, you've got regulators who are still trying to figure this out. When you think about your role as running communications, who are you primarily trying to communicate to?
Yeah, and that's one thing that I think really is critical is this concept of multi-stakeholder communication, right? So it's, to me, it doesn't matter if we're communicating internally to our employees.
You only want to hear something different, right? Don't you have to tailor the message?
Absolutely. But what's great, I think, about this function here at Aeva is comms sits kind of across all of the business, right? This role that I have it's on the executive team. So I'm partnering with our head of HR and with our head of IR to ensure that we have a clear and consistent message across stakeholder groups. I think it's early days for us still, so the investor audience is absolutely critical, and we want to make sure that we're nailing the message for that audience group. But that obviously trickles out and percolates over all of the other stakeholder groups that we communicate with, and that is absolutely media. To some degree, I think regulators and legislators as well. Although it's early days again for AVs and AV legislation, but we do pay attention to that as well.
I can't even imagine the difficulties, at least on the regulator side, because there's so much fear, and it makes sense, right? If self-driving cars, if they screw up, people die, right? And we've already seen issues along the way as this technology is being improved on. And my guess is you certainly don't want a situation where, oh, there was an accident, there was an injury, there was a fatality, and they trace it back. And it's like, well, it was Aeva's LiDAR that was at the core source for where all these decisions were made. I'm sure you guys are staying up at night thinking about what would happen in a situation like that.
Yeah, I'm not sure that it keeps us up at night, but we're absolutely committed to making sure that our sensors are functional and accurate, and beyond that, that truly they're automotive grade, right? And so, what does that mean? It means that we're putting our products through the proper testing to make sure that they don't fail over the traditional lifetime of a vehicle, which is quite long. And I think that's been one of the real learnings for me, coming from more of that consumer and commercial drone background, or Fitbit with wearables. When you're designing for a vehicle, right, the life cycle of a vehicle could be anywhere from 5 to 10 to 15 years or more, and you want to make sure that the components that you're designing that go into that vehicle are automotive grade, and ready for everything from shock and vibration testing to ingress from water or dust, to potentially road debris that strikes the vehicle. Think about a rock hitting your windshield. If it hits that lidar sensor, you want to make sure that the faceplate on that sensor is strong enough to take that.
That's a good point. I didn't think about that, right? Because think about like my phone. It's going to last maybe 2 years, 3 years,
Yeah,
right? When someone has a phone for 4 years, you're like, oh my gosh, how old is it? But you're right, with cars, totally different. You can't do that. You have to assume, well, this car could be on the road maybe for 20 years and everything's got
yep.
to work. It can't be breaking down after 2 or 3 years.
Exactly. And that's really where those partnerships that we have with ZF and Denso come into place, because these guys have, they live and breathe automotive every day. So it's what they do. And, they're helping to guide us in these regards to make sure that the product that we're developing internally and that we're designing is going to meet those specifications for what truly it means to be automotive grade.
What was your experience like going into last week as you guys had your quarterly earnings? It's publicly traded, so it's not a private company where earnings can be whatever. What was for you? How much of a challenge? How much of a lift is it going into that announcement, and then the fallout of whether it's good or bad, and media wanting to talk about it? Are you working 20-hour days? What is that like for you?
Yeah, and I think that that's fairly normal for anyone in the comms function at a public company, right? So there's a lot of, behind the scenes, there's a lot of prep about what's our narrative, right? And what did we accomplish this quarter? How do we want to package that up and clearly communicate that to the investor audience and beyond? And then how do we want to, articulate, our benchmarking against the milestones that we set out to accomplish for the year. So this was obviously the third quarter of 2021. And so we were making sure that not only did we recap kind of the big news of the quarter and the commercial traction that we've seen, but then also, revisiting and showing our investors that we're on track to hit all of our milestones by the end of this year, which is significant for a company of our size and still early stage development in the technology.
When you thought about the reasons why you wanted to take this job, tech PR, Bay Area, there's so many interesting companies. How much of it for you is, hey, I understand this tech, versus I just like the people that I'll be working with, versus this stock could go up a lot and I could make a lot of money? Like, what are the factors when you try to figure out how does someone pick a job in tech PR? Because some of them could go right, some of them could go completely wrong. And you've worked at a lot of big brands, right? DJI, you said
Mm-hmm.
Autodesk, PayPal, Fitbit. So you've done a good job being at these cutting edge names that are at the forefront of the zeitgeist.
Yeah, and everyone thinks you come to Silicon Valley to get rich quick, and some people do, but a lot don't. So I can tell you that wasn't really a factor in my consideration for this role. Really, what it comes down to is, and I feel very lucky to have been part of some amazing teams in prior roles at different companies, and it came down to the team, right? So I met with Sarush, I met with Mina, the co-founders, who have an amazing pedigree coming from Apple, some of the special projects that the Apple team is working on, and we just clicked. And it seemed like the right place to call home from that standpoint. Which, when you're spending, as you mentioned, 40, 60 hours a week, sometimes with these folks, like it really matters whether you have clear communication and the ability to trust each other and a shared vision for what success looks like. Beyond that, obviously the technology for me in a communications role, I have to believe, understand, and be passionate about the technology. And so when I think about everyone is already chomping at the bit of where's my self-driving car. I think that the hype cycle on that has played itself out. I think people realize that consumer level self-driving cars are probably still 5 to 10 years or more away. But
Oh,
when
I
you
thought
look
they were
at
sooner because I hear, oh, Tesla's got FSD, and I got
yeah,
colleagues from
yeah,
CNBC. They're just sitting there reading their newspaper, and the car's driving around. I thought it was much more imminent. And you're telling me it's 5 to 10 years out.
for us to buy a car that's truly going to drive itself everywhere that you want to go, it's a ways out. So
Right,
even a product like a Tesla FSD, which is a bit of a misnomer in terms of the branding they chose for that product. It really is what the industry calls a level 2 automation technology, and so it will help you in certain situations, like on the highway. But it can't handle everything that comes toward it yet, and so that's what
right.
I mean when we've got a little bit of a reset to do, I think, on consumer expectations. But the good news, and what made me super passionate and excited about Aeva, is that whether we're looking at a level 2 car or a level 3 or even a fully self-driving level 4, if and when we get to that, all of those vehicles are going to need perception and sensing, and they're going to need lidar. And so what's interesting at Aeva is we get to be at the center of a lot of the innovation that's taking place in this industry, but then completely outside of this industry as well. As we look at, like I said, like that industrial automation space, or even this industrial metrology, which is
Wait,
something I
wait,
didn't
what?
know
Wait,
about.
wait, what?
Yeah,
Industrial,
exactly.
what?
Industrial metrology. So this is something that's really fascinating. So when manufacturers are building things and assembling things, there's tight tolerances that some of these parts need to have, right, to be able to function and work well together. So one of our partners that we just inked right after I came on board is Nikon. And Nikon's a leader in optics and manufacturing, and they also have a really healthy industrial metrology business. And so what this means is they're using a LiDAR technology to verify tolerances and fit and finish on vehicles. And some of their customers include BMW and Stellantis, and some of the major aerospace companies that we were not allowed to mention their names, but you've definitely flown on their airplanes, right? And so these are really critical things in the manufacturing process. And with the Nikon deal, we're actually able to, we talked about having 500 meters of perception in the automotive space. We can also go down to the micron level of measurement with our technology, with the core technology that Aeva's developing. And that was another thing that really sold me on this company and our technology in the future, is that not only can we play in the automotive and automation space, but there's multiple uses for this technology that have real world use cases beyond automotive.
Right, that's a good point. Right, so there's looking at things at distance, like you mentioned, the 500 meters out, which at some point that'll be a kilometer, right? It'll just get better at that distance, and being able to track the speed of the objects that you're seeing. And that's all the macro. That's like the far away. Now you're talking to me about the micro. Look at how closely detailed you can figure these things out as it means for manufacturers. So that's fascinating, because I don't think people have a good sense for the non-auto use cases of what's happening with LiDAR.
Yeah, exactly. And this is one that, I kind of blew me away as well. I don't claim to understand all of the technical details about it, but what I do know is, the frequency modulated approach. This is something that a traditional time of flight LiDAR unit can't do. Simply can't do. There's accuracy here that is very unique to our technology and our technology approach. So it's really fascinating. And this is that whole concept of our tagline as a company is perception for all devices, right? And so that's what really excites me at the end of the day, is I think we're just on the cusp of seeing, what LiDAR can do, what perception can do for everything from, the next robo taxi company, to the iPhone or the iPad that's in your hands that has LiDAR in it, to potentially even, consumer applications like virtual reality or consumer health. One of the cool things that I love that our CEO uses as an example is, imagine that you're doing a home fitness routine. You've got, maybe one of those mirror devices where you watch the workout and model it as it's happening. that device could have a LiDAR detector on it that, with that micrometer precision, could be scanning you not only to see, are you using the right form, let's say in this yoga class, but also what is your respiration and what is your heartbeat.
You can
Because it
track
will be
that
able
through LiDAR?
it'll be able to measure vibrations on your skin to pick up your
Wow.
heartbeat
Wow.
remotely.
That's really cool. Maybe would have helped me this morning. I pulled my back trying to do deadlifts in the garage,
Yeah,
and maybe if the
exactly.
LiDAR had said, "Hey, your form's off.
Exactly.
You need to stop right now," that would
Yeah.
have been helpful. It makes me wonder
Yeah.
about at the airport, right? We do the X-ray scanners. Could this replace something like that if it has this type of great vision?
It's not able to go through surfaces, but one interesting application that it's already being used today is when you see airplanes pulling up to the gate at an airport. Oftentimes you see that crew person, the ground crew person down there with those orange or
Oh,
yellow wands kind of.
this guy. Yeah.
Correct, but they've already started to automate that. So some of those gates have LiDAR that's monitoring, the nose of the plane as it's coming in, and is giving the captain and the first officer the right signals to know exactly if they need to move right or left, and exactly when to stop the plane so it's at the right spot on the ramp so the gate can pull right up.
So all of these possibilities now, I hear that and think there's got to be some real challenges for you in order talking to journalists, let's say, or talking to the press to get the story out there, because now you can take it in so many different directions. There's so many different industries that this applies to. Again, no one can see the code. They can only hear about the possible impact. So what is your biggest challenge in terms of trying to get this story out there in the right way?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think one of the challenges for us again is we're pretty early on in the technology, and we've been transparent with our investors and other stakeholders that our product is really, we're looking at start of production in 2024. So a lot of this stuff is we've definitely got kind of alpha and beta products out there that customers
Oh,
like
it's not
Plus
in, so
and.
it's not in production right now.
Correct. Yeah, we're
Oh,
still
so it's
building it,
getting
very
ready.
much so. Yeah, but that said, we have two great automated trucking pioneers that are using our stuff. Too Simple is one of them, and Plus is the other one, and they're using these sensors on their trucks on the road today. So they're using the early stage and early versions of the technology, but we've been pretty transparent in saying we're not going to have kind of our first real fully ready product until 2024.
So
So a
what's the
lot of this.
difference? What's the difference between the sensors that are already out and then you're saying, oh, but we
Yeah,
don't have anything for 3 years? What's the difference?
yeah. A lot of the work that's going into our product is around miniaturization of the LiDAR key components. So things like lasers, optics, receivers. Traditionally these things are quite big and bulky. And one of the fascinating things that Aeva is doing, and this is really difficult, is we're putting all of those major components onto a single silicon wafer chip.
Oh, so it's
And
like really, really tiny. Yeah.
yeah, it's going to be about the size of your thumb, right?
Yeah.
And so what's amazing about that is it's a really difficult challenge to solve. But once we can do that, there are similar manufacturing processes that are used in the telecom industry that are going to allow us to benefit greatly from economies of scale. So once we figure out and can get that LiDAR on chip product out the door, which is going to happen soon, it's on our roadmap, um, we will be able to manufacture these at the hundreds of thousands slash millions of scale to really help propel that vision forward of perception for all devices. And in addition to that, that allows us to shrink the footprint and the weight of some of our current test samples that are out on the market today.
How much is this going to cost?
We're looking at sub $1,000. And I think even after that, scaling that, much lower as we ramp to those volumes in the millions. So the concept here is to create a sensor that's extremely functional, high performance, at a fairly low price point. And to illustrate, kind of the price disparity here, if you look at some of those vehicles, those robo taxi vehicles that we mentioned, sometimes the sensor suites on those vehicles can be upwards of $100,000 to $200,000.
It's like a Formula One car at that point. Like you
Yeah,
can't have that, right?
and that makes sense for a car that's designed for 24/7 operation if it's going to be driverless, right?
True.
Because it'll be constantly earning money. But for a consumer vehicle like that you or I would own, take for example, a $30,000 to $50,000 car, and then if you add $100,000 to the price tag just to make it self-driving, that's a non-starter for consumers. So we
Right.
know that the cost of these sensors really needs to come down in price to be able to be used by the Volkswagens and the Volvos and the GMs of the world to help us get our self-driving cars tomorrow.
When you think about branding, as you mentioned this earlier, you said how FSD is a little bit of a misnomer, right? Because it's not full self-driving all the time. When you see some of these other big brands, Tesla's sort of the primary one in terms of just their market cap and the attention that their founder gets on Twitter and all this, do you see like, hey, the narrative is all wrong here, and these big names are sort of skewing, and they're skewing what reality is, and they're making your job harder because end consumers have a skewed world of what's actually going on?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a narrative that we're seeing playing out across the space, whether that's in the media or in regulatory conversations, right? It's about setting consumers' expectations appropriately. I mean, if any consumer thinks they can get in a vehicle today that they own and fall asleep behind the wheel, that's definitely not a reality. And so, we're definitely cognizant of how that is marketed. For Aeva, it's not up to us, right? We don't make that final product, but it is something that affects the industry. And so, we're supportive of the right naming and consumer education that really needs to go into this for them to understand, what's the difference between parking assist type feature in a parking lot and lane change or something like that that's on a highway, right? And understanding that those vehicles are there to help them have a better driving experience, a safer driving experience, but the vehicle isn't ready to be fully autonomous just yet.
Right. And I think it's just a good reminder of everything else that you're doing, the industrial work, right? Those forklifts, the planes, the manufacturing. So there's going to be all these other applications so that, okay, well, they figure out cars, you guys are off and running in so many different spaces. So I want to turn a little bit to your own experience. So before you got to Aeva, you were working at DJI. You've been working at, in the past, PayPal, like you said, Autodesk, Fitbit. What did you take away from all these big brands? These are big time brands, right? Everyone knows them. What was just the thing that stuck out to you that either was something that people don't understand that's happening behind the scenes, or there was a common theme, a thread that related to all of them? What would be some lessons from there?
Yeah, I think when I look back on the prior experiences, is really what's excited me is being able to be at the forefront of innovation, right? And taking something that's complex. I mean, even the Fitbit on your wrist, there is a lot happening under the hood with things like optical heart rate and other sensing capabilities
Or just
that,
to figure out what is a step, right? For so many times, I
yeah,
always play with it. How does it
yeah,
know if this is a step or that's a step? And
yeah.
if I do that and do this, right?
Yeah, it's phenomenal stuff. I mean, when I was there, we were able to start looking at things like heart rate variability, which is the amount of time in between each heartbeat, and extrapolate things based on that. So we could see things like your respiration rate simply based on your heart rate, right?
That's
Which
crazy.
is totally mind blowing. And it's
For
like,
a
how do
pretty
you
cheap
take
device. It's
something?
not that
Yeah,
expensive. Yeah.
yeah. And how do you take something that's that complex and make that ready for a mass consumer audience, right? And the same challenge at DJI, right? DJI's drones are self-flying. You just tell them where to go, right? They've got all of these sensors built in, whether it's cameras, ultrasonic sensors, infrared sensors. Really, they're there helping that drone stay in the air, stay exactly where it's supposed to be, even if the wind is gusting at 30 miles an hour. And all you're really doing is telling this self-flying robot, fly forward, fly back, fly left, fly right, go up, go down, right? And so one of the things that I've loved about my career is just being able to dive deep on complex technology and figure out, how do we make this something that you can have a conversation about with you or me, or back with my family in the Midwest.
Speaking of the Midwest, on your LinkedIn, it says you went to University of Minnesota. Actually, one of my persons I hired, my brother-in-law, my cousin met their husband there, got married there. So I have a lot of people that went to University of Minnesota. But your major, Bachelor of Arts in Strategic Communications, it's so specific because it's exactly what you do. And you got a major in it in college. How much of that has mattered? How much did you learn getting that major? Because you see a lot of people, they come into this from so many other majors, but rarely is it the exact thing that you're doing. It's such a unique major to have been a part of.
Yeah, absolutely. And the lesser known fact is I started out as a mechanical engineering major,
So a little bit
because
of a
I
tech
was
thing there.
I happened to be relatively good at math and science, in high school, and I really enjoyed those subjects, right? But when I got to college, I fairly quickly discovered that this probably isn't what I want to do for the rest of my life. And so I was talking to friends and asking them about their majors and the classes they were taking. And what was interesting was I started hearing more and more about public relations. What goes on in that major and what are people studying and learning about. So I went into our journalism school, which is where our public relations and advertising majors lived, and started in the PR track. And then right before I graduated, they actually combined the two into strategic communications, and that's the degree that I ended up getting. I learned quite a bit. I think the 30,000-foot overview, but what I can tell you is that I learned absolutely the most with the internships and the early PR agency experience I had in my career. I mean, this is still a profession where you learn a lot on the job, right? You learn a lot through doing, through succeeding, as well as through failure. And an agency was one of the best places to cut my teeth.
That's amazing. It's amazing. I appreciate the time, Michael. Fascinating. I'm excited for what Aeva is going to do, what it's going to be. And I appreciate you just breaking it down for us. Like, here are all the challenges. Here's what we're working on. Here's what we're not working on quite yet. So I appreciate the time. I know you got to go here in a second because, of course, you're working with the CEO, getting ready for an interview, and that's going to get whatever traction it will get. And we'll have to see how that affects, of course, affects the brand, affects that stock price a little bit. Maybe you pick up another customer, maybe at least get some prospects and leads out of it. So really fascinating, Michael. I appreciate the time. Thanks for sharing all your stories with us today.
Yeah, Eric, you're very welcome. It's fun to talk to you, and I'm sure we'll circle back here in due course, and I'll have a lot more interesting stuff to share with you.
All right, thanks a lot. That was Michael Oldenburg, head of communications of Aeva, the Lidar firm. Fascinating conversation. I'm Eric Chemi. Thanks for watching.